common November topic that we're looking at is the one that the second resolution by the NFL resolved high school public forum debate resolution should not confront sensitive religious issues. So before I actually look at the arguments on either side and how this is different from many other topics that anyone's debated before in PF, I just want to actually look at the wording itself and look at what you can get out of that. Because the core of this topic is debate should not confront religious issues. Every other word in the topic is a qualifying word and adds or removes certain potential arguments. So it says high school public forum debate resolution. While it's not necessarily critical, it does provide some offense for the pro team on this topic. And they can talk about either this is the wrong level for this to happen on as far as grades go, the wrong level of maturity, the purpose of high school and college being different as far as education versus dialogue. It also allows them to talk about simply the event itself. The new public forum, because of the lay judges, because of the swiftly changing topics, or because of the way rounds are evaluated, may not be the best event to confront this. So pro teams have the option of talking about this will be the wrong forum, and there are other kinds of debates that might be more value-centered or more appropriate to confronting sensitive religious issues because you have more control over the kind of judging you get, or because you have more time to develop the arguments, or just because the maturity level of these different events happen. For instance, college public forum may be a far cry from high school public forum. High school LD may be better suited than high school public forum. All of those things that can be said that allow pro to get a lot of cons offense, but still not have to come out directly against confronting religious issues ever. So aside from those, the next qualifier is resolution. It talks about how high school public forum debate resolution should do this. Not necessarily just topics in general, resolutions in particular. So there can be topics that have religious elements. The question is, should the resolution itself confront these issues? And again, the difference in interpretation of that is going to come down to, is it okay for there to be a resolution that is religiously charged, or does the resolution itself have to confront the issue? And examples of these would be, X religion is superior, or X religion is a threat to national security, wouldn't directly confront an issue like this. There are other topics which may have significant religious underpinnings, but the topic itself, the resolution, does not confront the religious issue. The debaters have the choice to, and I think that's another distinction that can be drawn. Is it the resolution confronting the issue, or debaters confronting the issue within the resolution? And again, confront draws a similar kind of distinction here. Does the topic allow discussion of the issue, or does the topic itself confront the issue? I don't think that anyone on either side of the topic is arguing that debaters should be banned from discussing issues because they're sensitive or religious. The question is, should the nature of topics in this event at this grade level require them to? We think that that's smaller areas where pro definitely wants to focus this debate. So aside from that, the last thing that's going to be an issue to define in this, obviously, is sensitive religious issues. As those of you who've heard me at Capital and Stanford know, I talk a lot between definitions and interpretations, and in public forum, interpretation is probably better most of the time. When you say a definition, saying someone else says this word means this. An interpretation is what you think a group of words should mean. Sure, I can find definitions of sensitive, religious, and issue, and read all three of them from the dictionary. It's not going to get me anywhere in the round. What I can do, on the other hand, is I can say, I believe a sensitive religious issue is this, and here is why, in the context of this resolution, in the context of this round, this is what you, judge, should think a sensitive religious issue is. And there's a lot of different ways these can be defined. Obviously, the most useful for con is simply that anything is a sensitive religious issue at some point. If you look at any issue, somebody is going to have a religious stance on it. Whether they think it is an issue of social justice, whether it's an issue they believe that there is an imperative on, especially the more dogmatic religions that have an official stance on nearly everything, you're going to find somewhere in the Catechism or somewhere in a fatwa some stance on the issue, quite possibly multiple stances on the issue, depending on the religion. But as a result of that, you actually are going to find that it's possible and common for con teams to say everything is a sensitive religious issue. This is an argument against debate. We think debating is good. If pro's smart, con is going to have to do a little more work than that to win there, because there are a lot more nuanced definitions and distinctions that can be drawn by the pro team as far as what a sensitive religious issue actually is. And sensitive religious issues in the context of high school public forum debate resolutions can mean a couple things. One of which is that it's going to be an issue that is primarily religious. That the issue, the first thing that a judge will think of, a citizen judge, a lay judge, a community judge, somebody just off the street because they're not driving the bus between tournament rounds, believes that this is a religious issue when they first hear about it. So some issues are just primarily religious because that's how people react to them. For instance, separation of church and state may not be about any one religion, but nearly any judge who isn't experienced in debate is going to immediately think about it in terms of their own religion. Aside from that, you can think of there are some issues that are completely religious on one side. For instance, if you were to have a debate topic about abortion, the arguments against abortion, first and foremost, are going to be religious arguments. Maybe many other things that can be said, many other arguments that can be made, but for 9% of the judges, the argument that's going to matter is the fetus a life or not? And this is largely an issue that comes down to personal belief, personal religious preference. And it turns out that the vast majority of judges are much easier to convince to change their political views than their religious views. If you actually look at what some theorists have termed political brain, it is fairly easy to get someone to vote against their own political views if you unsettle them, if you explain that there's some important impact, if there is some looming threat, then that is fairly easy to do because political views come from kind of a cost-benefit calculus, even if not always there or not always completely rational. On the other hand, religious issues are generally taken on an act of faith, and you can't necessarily put someone in the middle ground nearly as much. Many people who do have political views like to believe they arrived at them through a process of logic and reason, and as a result, believe that they can be swayed from them in the context of a debate round. Many people who are fiscally conservative, for instance, may vote for a team that advocates government spending because they think they did a better job of arguing for it, the other team did of arguing against it, and they know much better arguments against it than the other team made. They will vote for the team they disagree with because they think they did the better debating. Now, on the other hand, if they're asked whether or not a fetus is a life, and they have to decide for or against, there's going to be one argument probably find more compelling, no matter how much depth either team goes into. It's a lot harder to get somebody into a frame of mind where they'll vote against their own beliefs than whether they'll vote against their own political views. So that's another way that you can look at a sensitive religious issue, something that doesn't fall into the political brain, something people choose to take on faith and are going to reject evidence of. And that practically makes the resolution of tautology for pro if Conless can get away with that. Another thing you can look at is just resolutions that are inevitably going to become religious, that you cannot avoid the religious debate in. These are sensitive religious issues. For instance, the old November topic, if it had been a community center should be built near ground zero, or there should be a community center near ground zero with a culinary school, with a swimming pool, and with a 9/11 memorial. I don't think there'd be any controversy. I don't think anybody would debate that. Adding the word Islamic is what makes that a debate. Adding the word Islamic is what makes the huge backlash against that. Adding the midterm elections also may have had a lot to do with the backlash against that because everybody was fine with it before that, Fox News included, but that is a different story. The point being that it is the addition of religion that charges that topic, and that is what would make that a sensitive religious issue under this interpretation. So those are the different parts of the resolution itself that actually need looking at and that people need to think of. Again, it doesn't mean you want to make everything into a definition debate. It does not mean you want to make anything into a framework debate. But the easiest way to avoid having those debates and the easiest way to make things clear to the judge is to think them through beforehand yourself, to know what you want those debates to be if they come up, and to easily just scare other teams out of talking about them. Well, here's what we think this should mean. Here's why we think it's the best. Here's how we think this makes for a good round. Let's get back to the substance is much more effective than being completely sandbagged by every team having an unexpected definition. So these are all terms and interpretations that you want to think through before the round starts. Anyhow, there's actually 3 primary problems with this resolution. And about 1.5 of them are actually opportunities. So we're going to look at the problems first and then the opportunities that they present. So the first problem that we actually have is just defining sensitive religious issue, because doing that is in and of itself going to be kind of religiously sensitive, which puts pro in an ugly position, especially if they speak first. Many times pro is going to end up deferring to con on this. Many times pro is going to explain, well, all of these things can be sensitive religious issues. We're not talking about any one religion. We just think that something that meets one of these interpretations will. Defining it is in and of itself going to be religiously sensitive. And you just want to point out whether or not that is the resolution confronting that or the debaters confronting that. And I think that's the distinction you need to draw there. The second big issue is just the nature of public forum itself, because there are a lot of refugees from policy and from LD and from Parley who actually go ahead and look at PF as kind of a refuge from meta-debate arguments. They want to think of it in terms of, okay, we can just talk about the topic itself, we don't need to talk about debating debate. It is part of the reason why pro and con aren't set up the same way as affirmative and negative are at every other event, with a guaranteed speaking order, a block, and a presumption. It's also part of why you will actually see a flat-out ban on certain kinds of arguments and definitions of other kinds of arguments. Anything more than one step removed from resolution, we refer to as off case in policy or neg case in LD, is probably not going to be the best bet in public forum. So, for instance, counter plans are not allowed, plans are not allowed, critiques are not allowed, and theory arguments, meta-debate arguments, are generally not allowed. We were to be talking about the other resolution on the Islamic Cultural Center, and one of my arguments against that resolution was that we shouldn't be talking about sensitive religious issues. Many judges who had actually read the public forum rulebook would choose to disregard that argument because it is a meta-debate argument, it is a theory argument, it is an argument that asks me to consider the nature of the activity itself rather than the arguments in the resolution. So this looks like an ugly double bind that pro can be stuck in. The answer is, for this one resolution, these are not just meta-debate arguments, these are direct discussions of the resolution. We shouldn't be allowed to talk about this any other month, but we are required to now because it asks us to define this as an event. So again, something that a lot of judges just won't be very receptive to, but at the same time, it is necessary to be made, and I think we need to point out on the pro that if you can't say that, there is nothing else to be said. Aside from that, the third problem with this topic that's going to be different for a lot of teams from other topics is just the nature of evidence, both in terms of where you get it and how big of a role it plays. Evidence is first off going to be more difficult to obtain, and second off is going to be less important to have. What's going to be more important is the warrants within the evidence, the reasons you can give, and the hypotheticals you can build. I think both teams want to try and paint a picture of what this activity will look like if their side of the resolution is true. So those are the different problems. Now, as far as opportunities go, the first opportunity just comes from, the half opportunity that is, comes from defining what a meta-debate argument actually is and what should and shouldn't be allowed in PF. Because this is an opportunity for you guys all, as debaters, to decide what you want this activity to look like for the next couple of years. It's one of the rare things you actually have license to make these kinds of arguments, even if that wasn't deliberate. And who wins rounds in this and what these arguments come out to is going to influence what you can do at later tournaments in the TRC and Nationals this year. So it's actually an opportunity there. It's a big problem, but again, it's certainly one that has some potential to pay off and allows you to look at things from a different direction. The second area that I think is as much, if not more, of an opportunity than a problem is the issue of evidence itself. Because this allows people to win simply by being smarter rather than by having better blocks, by thinking through better, by looking at how arguments interact better. Evidence still plays a role, but it plays a less central role than in many other situations on many other topics. So as far as evidence goes, again, I think hypothetical situations go a long way. Examining your opponent's assumptions go a long way. There are some places you can find evidence, so we're going to talk about a few of these. First place you can look is just First Amendment cases in front of the Supreme Court of the United States or state Supreme Court that talk about religion or involve education or preferably both. Books on debate, particularly older forms of debate in the first half of the 20th century, are also going to be fairly useful here as far as what is and isn't allowed back when what was and was not allowed back when rhetoric was a fairly common subject who's required to graduate from American schools. Another place that you could possibly look is just dissertations by communications professors, because a lot of them actually look at debate in college or look at debate in political discourse or look at how people evaluate these kinds of truth claims or these kinds of faith claims. And as a result of that, they're going to have some things in their dissertations and in their writings, if you choose to go and look through journals, that can also be fairly useful